Before I die, there's something the hospital never discovered. I have carried this secret for so many years that sometimes I can no longer tell where my memories end and the lies begin. People always imagine confessions happen suddenly, like in movies, a dramatic moment, a burst of guilt, a final act of courage before death. But the truth is uglier than that. Confessions grow slowly inside a person, like rust spreading through iron. At first it is only a small stain of regret. Then it becomes a weight in the chest. And eventually, it turns into something that poisons every breath you take. Tonight, I feel that poison stronger than ever. The doctors say my heart is failing. Funny, isn't it? After everything that happened in that hospital, after all the hearts I watched stop beating, it is my own heart that will betray me first. I suppose there is a kind of justice in that. For most of my life I was known as a quiet man, reliable, calm in emergencies, the kind of nurse families trusted when their loved ones were dying. If a patient suddenly crashed in the middle of the night, people would call my name first. "He knows what he's doing," they would say. "He always keeps his head." I built that reputation carefully over the years. Every calm gesture, every reassuring word, every moment of professional confidence was part of the mask. And the frightening thing is that sometimes I believed the mask myself. The hospital where I worked was old, built in the late 1970s, with narrow corridors and fluorescent lights that hummed softly through the night. Night shifts were the worst. The building felt almost alive then. Machines beeping in distant rooms, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air, the slow breathing of patients drifting through half-open doors. When you work long enough in a place like that, you start to feel like the entire world exists only inside those walls. Life and death begin to feel routine, ordinary. At first I told myself that everything I did was about mercy. That was the lie I repeated every time my hands trembled. Some of the patients were already dying, after all. Some of them were suffering so badly that even their families could barely look at them. Tubes, machines, monitors, the whole fragile system that keeps a body alive long after hope has disappeared. I told myself I was ending pain, that I was helping them escape. But the truth is something much darker. The first time it happened was not planned. People always want a clear beginning, a moment when everything changes forever. But reality rarely works like that. That night I was exhausted, halfway through a 12-hour shift. A man in his 70s had been admitted earlier in the evening. His lungs were failing, his body weak from months of illness. He kept asking the same question over and over again. Am I dying? No one wanted to answer him. I remember standing beside his bed, listening to the heart monitor ticking out its slow mechanical rhythm. His hand was cold when he grabbed my wrist. His eyes were wide with fear. "Please," he whispered. "Don't let it hurt." Something inside me shifted then. I wish I could explain exactly what it was. Compassion, frustration, curiosity, maybe all three. I adjusted the IV line. The medication flowed into his bloodstream a little faster than it should have. Just a small change, barely noticeable. The monitor began to slow. At first, I panicked. My mind screamed that I had made a mistake, that someone would notice immediately. But no alarms went off. No one came running into the room. The old man's breathing grew softer and softer until finally there was only silence. I stood there for almost 5 minutes before calling the doctor. No one questioned me. Patients died all the time in that ward. It was expected. And that was the moment everything changed. Because instead of feeling horror, I felt something else. Control. For weeks after that night, I tried to convince myself it had been an accident. Hospitals are chaotic places. Medication errors happen. Doctors make mistakes. Nurses make mistakes. Machines malfunction. People die. I repeated those thoughts over and over again until they sounded almost believable. But deep down, I knew the truth. The dosage had not been an accident. My hand had moved deliberately. I had watched the monitor slow down, and I had not tried to stop it. The strange thing was how quickly life returned to normal. The hospital continued its endless rhythm of admissions and discharges, emergencies and quiet nights. New patients filled the beds. New families sat beside them holding hands and whispering hopeful lies. My colleagues joked during coffee breaks, complained about long shifts, argued about trivial things. The world kept moving, as if nothing had happened. And yet something inside me had changed forever. I began noticing things I had ignored before. The fragility of the human body. The way a person could be alive one moment and gone the next. A heart monitor was nothing more than a fragile line on a screen. A tiny adjustment of medication could silence it completely. Doctors liked to believe they controlled life and death, but in reality, the power was much simpler than that. It rested in small decisions made quietly in empty rooms. And I was the one standing in those rooms at night. At first it was rare. Months passed between the moments when my mind returned to that dark curiosity. Each time I told myself it would never happen again. But then there would be another patient. Someone suffering terribly. Someone alone. Someone already slipping toward death. And the same voice inside me would whisper the same lie. You're helping them. The hospital never noticed a pattern because there was no pattern anyone could see. Patients died in different wards, on different nights, under different circumstances. Some were already critically ill. Some had complicated medical histories. In a place filled with suffering, death never seems suspicious. But I noticed something. I noticed how calm I felt in those moments. When a heart stopped beating, the room became strangely peaceful. The machines stopped screaming. The suffering ended. The chaos disappeared. It was like the world paused for a few seconds, and in that silence I felt something disturbingly close to relief. That feeling began to frighten me. Years passed like that, quietly, carefully. I moved between hospitals a few times, like many nurses do. New buildings, new uniforms, new colleagues who never knew the man I had been before. Every new place meant another clean start, another opportunity to convince myself the past had been a nightmare that would never repeat. But secrets do not disappear. They grow. The worst moment came late one winter night during a snowstorm. The emergency ward was overcrowded, ambulances arriving every few minutes. Patients filled the hallways because there were no free beds left. Everyone was exhausted. Doctors shouted orders across the room. Nurses rushed from one patient to another. Alarms echoed everywhere. In the middle of that chaos, a young woman was brought in after a car accident. She could not have been older than 22. She was unconscious, but stable. Broken ribs, internal bleeding. Nothing immediately fatal. The surgeons were preparing to take her into the operating room. I remember standing beside the bed while they stabilized her. Snow was still melting in her dark hair, and for a moment I saw my own daughter in her face. That thought should have stopped me. It should have shocked me back into reality. Instead, something else happened. I felt the same cold curiosity that had begun years earlier, the same terrible awareness that life was hanging by the thinnest thread. One small change, one invisible push in the wrong direction. But this time, I didn't touch the medication. Not yet. Because that night, something else happened. Something that would haunt me far longer than anything I had done before. The young woman opened her eyes, and she looked directly at me. When her eyes opened, everything inside me froze. It was only for a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The room was still full of noise, monitors beeping, doctors moving around, voices calling out instructions. Yet somehow, it felt like the world had narrowed to that single moment. She was confused, barely conscious. Her pupils struggled to focus, drifting across the room before finally settling on my face. I remember the way her eyebrows moved slightly, as if she was trying to understand where she was. People often think that patients who wake up after trauma are terrified or panicked. But that wasn't what I saw in her expression. She looked relieved. Her lips moved. But at first, no sound came out. Then finally, I heard the faintest whisper. "Am I going to be okay?" I had heard that question many times before in my life. Patients ask it every day in hospitals all over the world. Doctors avoid answering it directly. Nurses learn to respond with careful words. Comforting, but never certain. But something about the way she asked it made the air feel heavier in my lungs. For a moment, I didn't answer. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. She trusted me. Not the surgeons rushing around the room, not the machines keeping her alive. Me. The stranger standing beside her bed in a blue uniform. "Please," she whispered again. Her hand moved slightly, trying to reach someone. And without thinking, I took it. Her fingers were warm, despite the cold air in the emergency ward. I could feel the faint rhythm of her pulse against my skin. It was strong, steady, a life that had not yet decided to give up. "You're going to be okay," I told her. Even now I can still hear my own voice saying those words. And for a few seconds, I believed them. But hospitals are unpredictable places. While the surgeons prepared the operating room, another emergency arrived. A man suffering a massive heart attack. The staff split their attention between both patients. Chaos spread through the ward again. In moments like that, mistakes happen. The girl was left alone for almost 2 minutes. 2 minutes doesn't sound like a long time, but in a hospital room with the right medications nearby, it is more than enough. I remember staring at the IV line connected to her arm, the transparent liquid moving slowly through the tube, a small plastic clamp controlling the flow. My hand began to tremble. Inside my head, two voices were arguing with each other. One screamed that I had already gone too far in my life, that this was the moment to stop forever. The other voice, the darker one, whispered something much simpler. "You already know how this ends." I could have walked away. I should have walked away. Instead, I adjusted the clamp. just slightly. At first, nothing happened. The machines continued their quiet rhythm. Her breathing remained slow and steady. Then the monitor began to change. Her heart rate dropped suddenly. The line on the screen started to stagger. The alarms exploded into noise. Doctors rushed into the room seconds later, pushing me aside as they began emergency procedures. Someone shouted for more medication. Another nurse started chest compressions. The surgeons arrived moments later, trying desperately to stabilize her before surgery. For 15 minutes, the entire room fought to keep her alive, and I stood against the wall, watching. Eventually, the monitor flattened. The room fell silent. One of the doctors looked at the clock and quietly announced the time of death. No one looked at me. No one asked what had happened in those 2 minutes when she had been alone. But as the doctors covered her body with a sheet, I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. Her hand was still slightly open, as if she had been reaching for someone. For years after that night, I tried to erase her face from my memory. I told myself what I had always told myself before, that hospitals are unpredictable places, that people die even when doctors do everything right. There were too many variables, too many complicated medical conditions, too many fragile bodies balanced between life and death. One more death in a hospital ward rarely raises questions, and in the beginning, it didn't. The young woman's case was recorded like so many others. A tragic accident, complications during emergency treatment, an unsuccessful resuscitation attempt. The paperwork moved through the hospital system quietly, stamped and filed away among hundreds of other reports. Her family cried in a small waiting room while a doctor explained that everything possible had been done, that sometimes the body simply cannot survive trauma. No one looked at me when the explanation was given, but something had changed inside me after that night. It wasn't guilt, not in the way people imagine guilt. If guilt alone could stop a person, I would have stopped long before then. What I felt was something more complicated. Fear, yes, but mixed with something darker, something that had been growing slowly over the years. A realization. The system trusted me. Hospitals run on trust more than anything else. Doctors trust nurses to monitor patients. Nurses trust doctors' prescriptions. Administrators trust that everyone is following the rules. The entire structure works only because thousands of small decisions are made every day, without constant supervision. And that meant something terrifying. It meant that someone like me could disappear inside the system for years without anyone noticing. The deaths continued, though never in obvious ways. I was careful. Sometimes months passed between incidents, sometimes longer. Different wards, different hospitals, different types of patients. Always circumstances that seemed medically explainable. But patterns exist even when people try to hide them. I didn't realize that someone had begun to notice. Her name was Dr. Elena Vargas, a cardiologist who had recently transferred to the hospital. She was younger than most of the senior physicians, but known for something that made many people uncomfortable. She paid attention to details others ignored. Numbers, charts, timing. She believed that statistics told stories if someone bothered to read them closely. One evening, during a staff meeting, she mentioned something strange. The cardiac arrest rate during night shifts had increased slightly over the past 2 years. Not dramatically, not enough to cause panic, but enough to appear unusual compared to similar hospitals. Most people dismissed it immediately. "Patients here are older," someone said. "We handle more complicated cases," another doctor added. The explanations sounded reasonable. In medicine, there are always reasons for unexpected outcomes. But Dr. Vargas didn't seem convinced. Over the next few weeks, she began quietly reviewing patient records from previous years. I didn't know this at the time. None of us did. To everyone else, she appeared to be just another doctor doing research for an academic paper. Then, one night, she asked me a simple question. I remember the moment clearly because it felt so ordinary at first. I was finishing a chart at the nurse's station when she approached the desk with a folder in her hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Her voice was calm, friendly even. "Of course," I replied. She opened the folder and showed me several printed pages. Patient records, dates, times, a series of names I recognized immediately. "These cases all happened during night shifts," she said. "You were working during most of them." My heart didn't stop. It didn't race either. It simply became very quiet. She looked directly into my eyes. "I'm trying to understand something," she continued carefully. "Many of these patients deteriorated very suddenly. Did you ever notice anything unusual before their cardiac arrests?" The question was innocent on the surface, but in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't asking for information. She was studying my reaction. And for the first time in many years, I felt the faint shadow of panic creeping into my chest. Because somewhere inside that folder was the name of the girl from the car accident. And if she kept looking long enough, she would find the pattern. After that conversation with Dr. Vargas, something changed in the air of the hospital. At least it felt that way to me. Of course, no one else seemed to notice anything different. Nurses continued their shifts. Doctors continued their rounds. Patients continued arriving in ambulances at all hours of the night. From the outside, the hospital looked exactly the same. But inside my mind, every small detail suddenly felt dangerous. Every time someone looked at me for a second longer than usual, I wondered if they knew. Every time two colleagues lowered their voices while talking in the hallway, I imagined my name hidden somewhere in the conversation. The system that had protected me for so many years suddenly felt fragile. Because now, there was someone asking questions. For the next few weeks, Dr. Vargas became a quiet shadow moving through the hospital. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't report anything to administration. Instead, she simply observed. She reviewed charts late at night. She spoke with nurses about minor details most people would consider unimportant. Medication timing, monitoring equipment, shift rotations. At first I convinced myself that she was just being thorough. But then, one night I saw something that made my stomach tighten. She was standing in the medication room. The same small room where nurses prepared IV treatments and stored emergency drugs. The same room where I had spent countless quiet minutes over the years, adjusting dosages and convincing myself that everything I did was necessary. She didn't notice me watching from the hallway. She was looking at the storage cabinet where the cardiac medications were kept. Her eyes moved slowly across the inventory labels, studying the numbers printed on the boxes. She pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down. That was the moment I understood. She was counting. Not deaths, medication usage. Certain drugs were used during cardiac emergencies, powerful medications capable of stopping or restarting a heart depending on the dosage. Normally, the numbers were predictable. Hospitals track everything carefully. But if someone had been using those medications quietly, over many years, the numbers would begin to look wrong. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying every moment of the past decade in my head. Every hospital I had worked in. Every patient whose monitor had slowly fallen silent. Every medication cabinet I had opened when no one else was watching. Had I been careful enough? Had I made a mistake somewhere? Morning came without answers. But 2 days later, something happened that told me the truth. The hospital administration announced a routine internal review. They claimed it was about improving patient safety protocols, a standard procedure done in many hospitals. No one seemed alarmed. Staff members rolled their eyes during the meeting and complained about more paperwork. But when the meeting ended, Dr. Vargas remained in the room with 2 administrators. And she looked directly at me. It wasn't anger in her expression. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that only appears when someone already knows the answer. That night, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't searching anymore. She had already found what she was looking for. And now it was only a matter of time before everyone else saw it too. But what happened next was something I never expected. Because instead of going to the police, she came to see me alone. She found me near the end of my shift. It was almost 3 in the morning, the quietest hour in the hospital. Most patients were sleeping, the lights in the corridors dimmed, the usual chaos replaced by the low mechanical rhythm of monitors and ventilators. I was sitting at the nurse's station pretending to finish paperwork when I heard footsteps approaching. I didn't need to look up to know it was her. Dr. Elena Vargas stopped across the desk from me. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she placed a thick folder on the counter between us. I could see dozens of pages inside it. Charts, printed reports, notes written in careful handwriting. Evidence. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down. "I want to understand something," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. That frightened me more than anger would have. I forced myself to look at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. She opened the folder and slid several pages toward me. Even before my eyes focused on the names, I recognized them. Patient after patient. Dates stretching back years. Cardiac arrests during night shifts. Medication logs. And beside many of those dates, my name. "You were present during most of these events," she said. I didn't answer. She leaned back slightly, studying my face with the same quiet attention she had shown during our first conversation. "Statistically, this doesn't happen by coincidence," she continued. "One nurse being present for this many sudden arrests is extremely unusual." I could feel my pulse in my throat now, but still I said nothing. She closed the folder slowly. "I haven't reported this yet," she said. Those words echoed in my mind. Haven't reported. Not yet. "Why?" I asked. For the first time that night, her expression changed. She looked tired. Because what she said next was something I never expected. Because I want to know why you did it. The words hung in the air between us. I had imagined many possible endings to my secret over the years. Arrest, interrogation, a courtroom filled with reporters and angry families. But I had never imagined this quiet moment in an empty hospital corridor. One person asking a question no one else had ever asked. Why? Not how. Not when. Why? For a long time I didn't answer. I stared at the dim lights reflected on the polished floor, listening to the distant sound of a machine beeping somewhere down the hall. And then I realized something strange. For the first time in decades, I wanted to tell the truth. "You think I enjoyed it?" I said finally. She didn't respond. "You think it was about power," I continued, "or cruelty, or some twisted pleasure." Her eyes never left my face. "But that's not the real reason." I felt my voice growing quieter. "The real reason is something much worse." The memory of the girl from the car accident flashed through my mind, her hand reaching toward me, her voice asking if she would be okay. "I started because I thought I was helping people," I said. "Ending suffering, ending pain." Dr. Vargas said nothing. But after a while, I whispered, "I realized something." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Sometimes the people who die in hospitals aren't the ones suffering the most. I looked up at her. Sometimes it's the people who survive. The silence between us became heavy. Then she asked the question that would change everything. "How many?" I closed my eyes. Numbers had followed me for years. Dates, times, patient charts, medical codes. But the truth was that I had stopped counting long ago. Because once you pass a certain number, counting becomes meaningless. "I don't know," I said. For the first time that night, I saw fear in her eyes. And that was the moment I understood something terrible. She thought the story was ending. But for me, this confession had only just begun. When I told her I had stopped counting, the silence between us became unbearable. Dr. Vargas didn't interrupt. She simply watched me, waiting. I realized in that moment that she was trying to understand something most people never even consider: how a person slowly becomes capable of doing something unforgivable without realizing it until it's too late. I leaned back in the chair and looked up at the ceiling lights. They were the same dull fluorescent panels I had stared at during thousands of night shifts. How many nights had I spent under those lights, pretending to be the person everyone believed I was? "People think monsters are easy to recognize," I said quietly. "They imagine someone cruel, violent, obvious. But that's not how it works. Most monsters look ordinary. They go to work. They smile. They hold doors open for strangers." Dr. Vargas remained completely still. "You want to know the truth?" I asked. "Yes," she said. I exhaled slowly. "The truth is that after the first few deaths, it stopped feeling like murder." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, in concentration. "It started feeling like responsibility." The word sounded wrong even as I said it. "In a hospital you see suffering every day," I continued. "People begging for relief, Families begging doctors to do something, even when everyone knows nothing will change the outcome. Machines keeping bodies alive long after life has already disappeared. I rubbed my hands together slowly. At first, I told myself I was ending pain. But after a while, something else happened. I started believing that I understood death better than anyone else in that building. The words echoed in the empty corridor. I began to see patterns, I said. Patients who would never recover. People trapped inside bodies that had already begun shutting down. Families who couldn't accept what was happening. Dr. Vargas leaned forward slightly. "So you decided for them?" she asked. Yes. I didn't hesitate, and saying that single word out loud felt like opening a door that had been locked inside my mind for years. "But here's the part no one will ever understand," I said. She waited. "I wasn't always wrong." Her expression hardened. "You're saying some of them would have died anyway." "Yes. That doesn't make it mercy." "I know." The truth settled between us like dust. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked something I had never expected anyone to ask. "What about the girl from the car accident?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her. "How did you—" "She was 22, Dr. Vargas said quietly. "Stable condition when she arrived. No immediate life-threatening injuries. And yet she suffered sudden cardiac arrest while alone in the room." My throat tightened. "She spoke to you," Dr. Vargas continued. "Two nurses remember hearing you talking to her earlier that night." I closed my eyes. The memory returned instantly. Her voice. Her hand. The question. "Am I going to be okay?" "Yes," I whispered. "She trusted you," Dr. Vargas said. I felt something inside my chest break open. "That was the moment I realized something," I said slowly. "What?" "That I had already gone too far to stop." The words sounded hollow even to me. "Because if I stopped then, I would have had to face everything I had done before." Dr. Vargas stared at me for a long time. Then she asked the final question. "Why are you telling me this now?" I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because the answer was so simple. "Because I'm dying." She looked at me sharply. "The doctors already know," I said. "Stage 4 heart failure. They gave me a few months at most." The irony felt almost poetic. A nurse who spent years watching heart monitors fade to silence. And now mine is the one failing. I leaned forward slightly. "And there's something else you should know." Her expression changed. "What?" I met her eyes. "You think the pattern stopped when I came to this hospital." She didn't speak. "You think this is the only place where something like this happened." The silence became suffocating. And then I said the words that had haunted me for years. "You're only looking at the last chapter of the story." Her face slowly lost color. Because in that moment, she finally understood something that no investigation had yet discovered. This hospital was not where it began. When I told her that this hospital was only the last chapter, the expression on Dr. Vargas's face changed in a way I will never forget. Until that moment, She believed she was dealing with something terrible but contained, a series of suspicious deaths within a single institution. Something tragic, yes, but manageable. Something the system could investigate, expose, and eventually close. But what I had just told her meant something very different. It meant the story stretched much further back. Further than any investigation inside this hospital could reach. "You worked at 2 other hospitals before coming here," she said slowly. I nodded. "And before those," I replied quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. "You mean?" "Yes." The word hung in the air like a confession, heavier than all the others. For a moment, she didn't speak. I could almost hear the calculations happening in her mind. The years, the number of shifts, the number of patients passing through different wards and different hospitals. The possibility of how many lives could be hidden inside those quiet corridors of time. "How long?" she finally asked. I thought about the question. The answer was both simple and impossible. "Almost 20 years," I said. The fluorescent lights above us hummed softly. 20 years of night shifts. 20 years of quiet rooms and silent machines. 20 years of moments where a single decision changed the course of a life forever. Dr. Vargas slowly sat back in her chair. "If what you're saying is true," she whispered, "then there could be dozens of cases." I didn't respond, because we both knew the truth. Dozens would be the optimistic estimate. For the first time since our conversation began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of me as a person, but fear of what the truth might reveal if someone actually began to dig through 2 decades of hospital records. "Why didn't anyone notice before?" she asked. I gave a small, tired smile. "Because hospitals are built to handle death," I said. "People expect it there. It's the one place where dying doesn't automatically raise questions." I paused. "And because the system moves slowly. Patient records are archived, staff change jobs, administrators retire, doctors relocate to other cities. After a few years, very few people remember the details of a single night in an emergency ward. But numbers remain." "And you think no one will ever uncover all of it?" she asked. I shrugged slightly. "They might." The thought didn't frighten me anymore. Eventually, someone will notice the same pattern you noticed. Maybe next year. Maybe 10 years from now. Maybe long after I'm gone. Dr. Vargas stared at me. "Then, why confess now?" she asked again. I looked down at my hands. For years I had imagined this moment as something dramatic. A courtroom, reporters, angry families demanding answers. But instead, it had arrived quietly in an empty hospital corridor at 3 in the morning. And the reason was much simpler than anyone would expect. "Because I'm tired," I said. Not physically. Though that was true, too. I meant something deeper. I spent 20 years pretending to be the person everyone believed I was, I continued. The calm nurse, the reliable one, the man who always knew what to do in an emergency. My voice lowered. But the truth is, I stopped knowing the difference between helping and destroying a long time ago. Dr. Vargas didn't interrupt. And then I said the words I had never spoken aloud to anyone before. The worst part isn't the deaths. She frowned slightly. It's the silence that comes after. I looked down the empty corridor, because once the machines stop, once the alarms fade, once the doctors walk away, and the body is covered with a sheet, everything becomes quiet again. And the hospital continues exactly as it always has. New patients arrive. New families sit beside hospital beds. New nurses walk through the corridors during night shifts. And the world moves forward as if nothing ever happened. I looked back at Dr. Vargas. "You asked me why," I said softly. She nodded. "The truth is, I still don't know." The confession ended there. Not with a dramatic revelation. Not with a number. Just a question that would never have an answer. And somewhere down the corridor, a heart monitor continued its steady rhythm. Beep, 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 as if reminding both of us that life inside the hospital was still moving forward, even after everything I had just admitted.